Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we will be joined by Jake Rill of MLB.com to break down all things that are happening in Orioles camp. But first, we want to welcome a new title sponsor here at Orioles on the Verge. This episode is brought to you by our IQ Bar, our exclusive snack, hydration, and coffee sponsor. IQ Protein Bars, IQ Mix Hydration Mixes, and IQ Joe Mushroom Coffees are the delicious, low-sugar brain and body fuel you need to win your day. The Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all IQ Bar products and flavors. You get 9 IQ Bars, 8 IQ Mix Snacks, and 4 IQ Joe Sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified and entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. All IQ Bar products are tested with clean, delicious ingredients that keep you physically and mentally fit, like magnesium, lion's mane, and more. Now, their products come in a variety of flavors. I will say personally, I've had a few. Peanut Butter Crisp is one of my favorites, so you get a chance to check out IQ Bar. Be sure to check out that flavor or one of their many other great flavors. And the good news is that we have an offer available to you right now. IQ Bar is offering special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text MLB to 64,000. Text MLB to 64,000. That's MLB to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. And we also have that here on the lower third of the screen for those of you watching on YouTube. And with that, now I will introduce tonight's guest. He covers the Orioles for MLB.com. You can read his work over on the Orioles website, and if you've not subscribed to his excellent e-newsletter, be sure to do so. He is Jake Rill. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on tonight, guys.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And I just want to start off with a general sense of how things are going in camp. Would you say that the vibes around camp are good right now, especially compared to the way last season ended? And what are some of the differences you're seeing between this year's team and last year's club?
Yeah, I mean, the vibes are definitely up. I mean, I think the vibes in this camp are as good as they possibly could be after as disappointing of a year like as last year. And I think a lot of the credit for that has to go to Craig Albertaz, which is kind of obvious. I mean, you're not seeing many big league managers break out the slip and slide for sliding drills or, just ribbing guys and keeping the trash talk up. So I think he gets a lot of the credit for how high the vibes are. And then I think also Pete Alonso obviously gets a lot of the credit because he's come in here with a fresh outlook and just kind of stepped right into that leader role that, when you sign a guy to a contract like that, you're signing him for more than just the stats and more than just numbers on the baseball reference page. You're signing him to come in and be a leader, and he's been a big part of that. And I think those two guys have helped this organization kind of turn the page on last year. They're helping build the excitement for this year. And I think it's a different feel than past spring trainings. Every manager is going to run a spring training differently. Albie's spring training is going to be different than Brandon Hyde's. And, there's no right or wrong way to run a spring training, or maybe there is, but every manager is going to be different and different methods are successful. But Albie's is definitely different than what we had seen here in the past. And a lot of that's just the trash talk, the having fun, the keeping it really loose, maybe more loose than other camps. So I think the vibes have been up, and I think those two guys get a lot of the credit for it.
Love it. I felt like when we were talking before spring training started, we kind of threw out the question amongst ourselves, like, are we going to be able to pick up anything from, Albertaz, the way he manages the game in spring games and how that's going to translate to spring? And I know my response was, I just want to see the vibes in spring because I feel like when the lights get turned on in the regular season, it's going to be a lot different for a first year manager. We'll see how this team responds, but good to hear that things seem loose and upbeat at camp. You touched on Pete Alonso and taking on that leadership role. On the pitching side, I know Chris Bassett's new to the organization. He hasn't been there that long, but is he someone who's kind of stepping into that role on the pitching side, or is there someone else that's kind of stepping up to be that role amongst the pitchers, or is Pete Alonso just an all vibes, all team guy who's leading the whole way?
I do think Alonso is that, and I think it was noticeable before they signed Bassett, those first couple of days of just the pitchers and catchers workout. I was watching Pete over there, like covering first on PSP drills, and he kind of got the pitchers together and was given kind of like a rah-rah, let's keep the energy up kind of thing. But I think since Chris Bassett got signed, he's definitely kind of stepped into that leadership role on the pitching side. Cade Povich was talking about it a lot one day. They were catch partners for a few days in a row, and Bassett just showed up in camp, and he's already giving Povich little tips and saying maybe try this, try that. Also, just kind of keeping the energy up with the pitchers. The day of the USA hockey gold medal game, Chris Bassett was kind of leading the group of guys watching that on the couch. He was kind of keeping the energy up during that. He was getting the most excited. I've really seen him kind of just talking to everybody. He's talking to Kramer, Bradish. He's really kind of lending any kind of advice that he has. And he obviously has a lot of it being in the game for so long. And I think him and Alonso kind of feed off each other because they have that tie. They spent that season together in New York with the Mets in 22. So they have that history. They have that friendship there. And I think their ribbing of each other and kind of the trash talk and that live BP when they face each other is kind of trickling down the roster. And guys are seeing how these guys do it, these guys who have been successful and have been veterans in the sport for a long time. So I think together they're kind of being co-leaders now. And I think Bassett's really going to be a big influence of that on the pitching side, just based off the early indicators of the conversations he's having and just kind of the reception he's gotten from the younger pitchers in camp.
I know there was no TV or radio coverage of today's game against the Netherlands, but it sounded like, just following along on Blue Sky or Twitter, that some sloppy defensive play early in the game, and Alonso actually called like a huddle up with the infielders and basically said, let's keep our heads in the game. I think that veteran leadership maybe is something that was missing last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Today's game was pretty sloppy. I think you can tell that just from looking at the box score with I think it was 4 errors they ended up with. Jeremiah Jackson had to play at shortstop. That was a tough read that probably should have been caught. Played the Gunnar Henderson would have caught the ball one. I think it says a lot that Pete kind of rallied these guys. It's March 3rd, and it doesn't matter if they beat the Netherlands, but they want to play clean baseball. They want to play crisp baseball, and he thinks that starts now. And if you're doing it now, it's going to become second nature. You're going to be doing it in the regular season. He doesn't want guys to fall into bad habits just because, they are playing a little sloppy in spring training. So, yeah, I think 100% it says a lot that he's doing that in spring training. And I expect him to continue that leadership role into the regular season. I'm sure we'll see more of it as camp continues and once the real games start.
And obviously a huge story this spring training has been Jordan Westberg's injury. Started with the oblique, and then obviously we heard about the elbow injury. He got PRP injection. Sounded like he was actually running, him and Jackson Halliday working out a little bit today. But huge opportunity for Kobe Mayo to potentially win the third base job coming out of camp. What do we think? How has he looked so far? What are the vibes down there like on that front?
Yeah, I think Kobe Mayo so far a little bit has looked like a guy who hasn't played third base in a while. I mean, I think there has been a little bit of rust there. He was just putting so much focus and effort into first base. He was out there every day with John Mabry for the second half of last season, doing those first base drills, intense first base drills. He was putting all of his effort into that. He was getting good at first base, I think. Like, he was starting to look like maybe that is the path for him. He is going to be a long-time first baseman. Goes into the offseason thinking he's going to just do first base work, and then the Alonso signing happens, and he gets told, hey, you should probably start working at third a little bit now too, and kind of do both. And since we've been to camp, it's been strictly third base for him, and a lot of that has been the infield injuries. So I think as he gets back used to playing third base, it'll look little bit better. I mean, he's never going to be Jordan Westberg at third base. He's just not at that level defensively. His body type, I think we all know, maybe a little too big body to be a Gold Glove third baseman. The arm accuracy has always been a little bit of a work in progress. The arm strength is there. He can sling it across the diamond, but he continues to, tinker with arm slots. That's always been a big talk in past spring training. So trying to find that arm slot that's going to be the most successful for him. So it's looked a little tough here in the first couple spring games. There were a couple errors. He has made a nice play or two since then. I think as he gets more used to being back over there, it's going to look a little bit better. And I think at this moment, he's probably the best choice to play third base as you look up down the roster, especially if the bat continues to do what he did with it in last September. I think you can deal with the defense at least for 7 innings, replace him with a defensive guy, just to try to get that bat in the lineup. I think he's their best choice at the moment, and I think it's going to look better as he gets more reps from spring. He's obviously going to get some, especially now that a lot of infielders have left for the WBC. there's going to be plenty of playing time for him here in these last 3 weeks of camp.
He even got an inning at shortstop, so I mean, the glove's got to be coming along, right?
Yeah, he definitely did not think that was coming. That was a funny moment in camp, and I thought it was pretty telling that Gunnar came up and charged that one grounder that was kind of in between them. I think Gunnar knew he'd take the lead on that play.
We've heard, we've seen some good things about the prospects in camp. Enrique Bradfield Jr. had a few highlight reel plays before he went off to Team Panama in the World Baseball Classic. Trey Gibson has looked good on the mound, and Vance Honeycutt, all of a sudden we're seeing a power surge after a really disappointing 2025. So, of the prospects that are in camp and looking maybe the guys that have no shot of making the major league roster but can still make good use of their time with the team for the next few weeks, who has stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of them. Enrique Bradfield's always fun to watch to me. I just think he has such a skill set that nobody else on the Orioles roster really has, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see how his career develops. Um, Obviously, the question is how much can he hit? As long as he hits enough, the speed and the glove is there. And it's always been fun to watch him, especially the other day when he dropped down a bunt, which he admitted wasn't even a good bunt, which it really wasn't. It went back to the pitcher, and he still legs it out, forces the bad throw, ends up on third. So he stands out just because of the speed. I mean, he's just so fast compared to everybody else in camp. Um, Another guy who's really stood out to me is Anthony Nunez. I really like his arm. I like the secondary stuff. Obviously, he has such a crazy story of getting drafted as an infielder, getting released, going back to college, picking up pitching, kind of out of nowhere after never pitching in his life. It's pretty remarkable that in just a couple years, just how good of a pitcher he has become. So much so that he's probably going to be in the big league bullpen at some point this year. Yeah, I just really like his secondary stuff. The slider's really nice. So he's a guy. I mean, there's a lot of those pitchers in that bullpen competition. Cameron Foster's another one. He's looked good. Grant Wolfram's looked really good. I know he's not a prospect, but there's a lot of guys in that bullpen competition of that ilk who have stood out. Nestor Herman, he's looked really good. You ask Craig Albanaz about any of these guys like Luis De Leon, Herman, Gibson, and he's always just like growth. Like that's all he says, just because it's like every one of these guys has really good stuff, and they each kind of have their own skills or their own strengths. De Leon just has high 90s plus stuff. Gibson has all these pitches. Herman's just really good. All of these guys have looked good in camp to me. It's been really fun to watch them, especially being at the big league games all season long. I don't get to see a lot of these guys in person a ton, except for the few times I do go down on the farm. So it's really fun to watch these guys in big league camp get their chance to make an impression, play in front of the big league coaching staff. Yeah, I'd say the biggest ones that have caught my eye are the pitchers: Anthony Nunez, Gibson, Herman, just because they've really held their own in camp, and it shows that have showed that their stuff can play at the big league level probably pretty soon.
Have you noticed any difference in how the younger prospects, like those guys, even the ones that like Nestor Herman or Trey Gibson, aren't going to make the major league club out of camp, but have you noticed any difference in maybe how they're incorporated into workouts, spring games, or how the coaching staff are talking about these younger prospects compared to years past as you covered the team?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the big things Albie always says is that there's no second-class citizens in camp. Like, everybody's an equal. If you're in big league camp, you deserve to be there. Even if you're one of those guys who aren't going to make the team, they're not going to treat you any differently or handle you any differently. Like, they want these guys to get the experience of big league camp. So even if there's not an actual shot of trying to make the team, they want these guys to go out there, participate in drills, play in the games, and give the effort that they would if they were battling for a roster spot. I think it's really impressive the way Albie kind of does that and handles these guys. The Orioles have honestly always done a good job of that. I feel like the last couple springs, it's always been like these prospects are there to get their shot to make an impression on the big league staff. They're going to be throwing in front of Drew French and hitting in front of the hitting coaches. So I don't feel like it's been like a huge shift, but I think Albie does do a good job of like, hey, this is your chance to show what you can do. We're not going to treat you any differently. Whether you're Pete Alonso or whether you're Nate George Nate George isn't a big league camp, but he is. Even when that's a good point though. When they bring over the guys from minor league camp, it's like the extras on the days of games. So Vance Honeycutt, Nate George, they work out with the team all day, and they do get thrown out there just like they're in big league camp and they're with those guys. So I think it's a really good opportunity for those guys to make an impression on the big league staff, even though, like you said, they're not going to be on the team and they don't get treated any differently. It's, hey, go out there and give it your best, and we're going to evaluate you and be hard on you and give you constructive criticism so that when you go back to minor league camp or when you get options, it's going to set you up for success this year in the minors.
Love to hear that.
Point on Bradfield. I mean, the defense is truly remarkable. It's not just the speed either. It's like he gets put in right field in that game and he just takes a direct route perfectly, cuts the ball off, makes a great play. Yeah, he's been super impressive for me.
Yeah. We had, speaking of younger, not a prospect, but still a younger guy, Heston Kjerstad. I don't think we've only had one show since spring game started, and that was our top prospect list. So we haven't even really had a chance for the three of us to kind of dive into our thoughts this spring. But Kjerstad, I can only speak for myself, but I imagine there are a lot of fans who agree that coming into 2026, once the news came out that Kjerstad was going to have a full spring, I know my response was like, that's good news, but like I'm not even penciling him into like a roster projection. It's whatever he can provide in 2026 is a plus. We still don't have any idea why he didn't return last year, and his personal health is no one else's business. But knowing his past with the myocarditis, the concussion, I know we're kind of left like a second time now wondering, just put baseball aside, is this guy just going to be okay? Clearly he feels good now. He's playing well. Do you see any viable path for Heston Kjerstad to make this roster at a camp, or potentially even, I mean, to make this kind of like a two-part question, could they even potentially move on from a Leody Tavares when you see a Dylan Beavers working out there in center field? Is him being kind of like a backup option to Cowser and that allowing Kjerstad to make the roster?
Yeah, I do think it is a tough path. He's got to come in here and really force their hand and have a spring that makes them, find the spot for him. And he is kind of doing that. He has looked really good. The bats have been great. The numbers, I know they're not super important, but he is hitting well. Like you said, Leo Tavares, they would probably have to move on from him, find a room for Kjerstad on the roster, just because you'll have Ward, Cowser, O'Neill, Beavers. Those are the four outfield blocks. You're not going to carry six outfielders, especially with just how shaky the infield depth is at the moment. If Kobe Mayo is your third baseman, you need to have somebody on the bench, maybe Luis Vazquez or one of these guys who can be a good backup infielder. So it gets tricky with the roster construction there to make a case for Heston Kjerstad as a sixth outfielder. He would have to be the fifth outfielder, and the only one of those guys who you would be comfortable maybe pushing off is Leody Tavares. And I think it is a little bit telling that Beavers has gotten more time in center, because when we talked to Beavers at Birdland Caravan, we'd asked him, have you done any work in center? And he said, no, not at all. And he wasn't really expecting it. And then we get to camp, and he does get mixed into the center field drills. We see him making starts in center field in games. And they've talked about it as, this is going to make him better in the corners. And while that's true, it's also, hey, maybe this guy can be the backup center fielder to Cowser. Leody Tavares has had up and down moments in this camp. He had that game in Fort Myers against the Twins where he had a couple tough plays in center. That was mostly lost the ball in the sun. This guy's track record of being a decent defensive player is kind of his calling card, and I think would be why you would keep him on the roster more so than what he can bring offensively. But if Kjerstad's carrying the cover off the ball and you're like, hey, this is a really good add for our roster, maybe a left-handed power bat, which is maybe something that you don't have on the bench otherwise, just because you have the right-handed guys. You have Mountcastle, you have Jeremiah Jackson, but you don't have maybe a guy like Kjerstad to maybe bring a little more balance to that lineup, which is weird to say because it felt like this lineup was so left-handed heavy for so long, and now you have Alonso, you have Taylor Ward, you have a healthy Tyler O'Neill, hopefully. That having another left-handed bat could be useful with Kjerstad, but I think he has to keep it up. I don't really think there's anything he needs to change at the moment just because he has had such a good first 3 weeks of camp. If he keeps playing the way he's playing, putting up these numbers, line drives off the bat all the time, his defense is going to be what it is, but you're not keeping him on the roster for his defense. You're keeping him on the roster to get some starts at DH, to be left-handed power. So I think it's still a little bit of a tricky path just because you can option him at the start of the year. You can see what Leody Tavares brings to the team. You can kind of play with your roster like that and see if that's the best composition of it, and maybe bring up Heston a little bit later if he goes down to AAA and starts raking, which it seems like he almost always does when he goes down to AAA. except for last year when he was obviously dealing with whatever he was dealing with and maybe wasn't 100% himself as we had seen in the past. So I think he just keeps doing what he's doing this spring. He's going to at least give them a tough decision to make at the end of camp. I'm not sure it's going to be enough to get him on the team, but he's going to at least give them something to think about when it's that last week and they're like, hey, this is a guy we should bring north with us.
Speaking of center field, are you surprised Blaze Alexander hasn't gotten much run or a shot to see what he looks like out there?
Yeah, I think he's going to. It's just been a little tricky here early in camp just because the infield depth has been kind of what it is. It's better now that they signed Tyro Estrada. At least there's a guy you can throw it in there in the Grapefruit League game. So I think early in camp it was just kind of a little necessity, like, hey, we got to play somebody here in the middle infield, play somebody at third. We're going to put Blaze there. That's probably where he's going to play mostly at the start of the season, at least until Holiday comes back, I think. Once Holiday comes back, I feel then Blaze can move around more. Even without Westberg, at least then you have Holiday locking down second. You don't have to worry about putting Blaze there really at all. So I think over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see him more in the outfield, especially as they start to get infielders back from the WBC. Once they get back to Vasquez and Gunnar, like as you get to that last week of camp, I think there'll be more opportunities to get Blaze reps out there in the outfield. But I think he's comfortable out there. It seems like he plays fine out there. I know he's an infielder first, so I don't think they're too worried about it. And especially with the outfielders they do have on the roster, like I'm not sure how many start realistically he would get there based just on current roster construction. But I think they love having the option. They love having a guy who they can put out there. And I think as we get through here these last couple weeks of camp, we're going to see him out in the outfield at least a little bit more.
I want to go back to Tyler O'Neill for a moment since you brought him up earlier. We know that his first season with the Orioles didn't go the way that he or the club would have wanted it to, and he's also has a long track record of injuries in the majors. But with that said, the bat has looked good in camp so far. Where's your sense of where he is physically right now, and is he hopeful perhaps that this season's going to be a little bit better?
Yeah, I think he's in a little bit better shape physically. As weird as this is to say, he's maybe a little less jacked than last year. Like he's still like the most jacked guy on the team, obviously, but like he focused more on other stuff in the off season, less so lifting and stuff like that. You can kind of see it in the neck area that he's maybe not like less bodybuilder, more baseball player now, and I think that's going to help him durability wise. Also, maybe move around the outfield a little bit better, base pass. But this is still a guy who you're going to have to be very careful with, just with the injury track record. It's been proven that this is a guy who he's going to go on the IL probably at least once this year. It's just what it is. So you got to be smart about it. Give him these DH starts, give him time off, and I think having Dylan Beavers on the roster is going to help a lot with that. Just because you have guys who you feel comfortable playing if you give Tyler a day off. But I've been really impressed with the quality of the at bat so far this spring. He looks really good. He looks like the type of player he was in Boston in 24, maybe even as good as he was there early in St. Louis. It looks like a better Tyler O'Neill this spring than what I saw last spring. And I think that's really encouraging because if they're able to manage his health and they're able to keep him on the field as frequently as possible, he could be a big part of this lineup, and it just adds another right-handed bat with all these other ones that they brought in. And I think it just makes the lineup that much deeper. So I think he's really hopeful. I think the team's really hopeful. And, you know, I kind of believe what he's been saying and what the team's been saying about their encouragement and optimism about him, because it's kind of matched the eyeball test to me of what I've seen out here, that he looks to be in better shape. He looks more mobile. He looks like he's going to be a guy who can actually make an impact in 2026.
How about guys that may or may not make an impact in 2026? Ryan Mountcastle, how much longer can the team play kind of Russian roulette with keeping him on the roster with the room? Obviously, the injuries to Westberg and Holiday will help him potentially make the opening day roster, but you already got Basayo, Mayo, Alonso for first base DH. Adley could get some time there. Tyler O'Neill could get some time there. What do you see this year looking like for Ryan Mountcastle and the Orioles?
Yeah, I think it's weird. I mean, if you had told me that he'd still be on this roster at this point after they made the Alonso signing, I'd be surprised. I'd really be surprised if you told me that Alonso, Mountcastle, and Mayo would all still be here. But at least Mayo is a guy who can put it third, and that proved to be valuable as soon as Westberg got hurt. Yeah, I don't know how much playing time realistically there is for Mountie right now, just because, like you said, you want Basayo and Rutschman in the lineup as often as possible together. You're going to use the DH a lot for that. You need to use O'Neill in the DH just to keep him healthy. If you carry a guy like Heston Kjerstad, you're going to want him at DH some. Jeremiah Jackson, if he makes the roster, he's probably going to be at DH some because he is such a bat first player and doesn't really have a true defensive position. So it does make it tough to find opportunities for Mountcastle because they keep saying like, oh, well, he'll get some time at first, but I just don't know how much time at first. You're not paying Pete Alonso 155 million to DH a ton. Like you're paying him that much to play first base every day. He has a track record of playing first base every day, and he'll go out there and post for you. So I think it's tricky right now to find time for Mountie, and it would still not surprise me if at some point this year he gets traded. It just makes too much sense maybe to try to get a pitching package for him. This bullpen needs another high leverage arm, in my opinion. It needs more depth. Maybe you could get young starting pitching as part of a package. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I think it just makes too much sense because if you're able to deal Mountie for something like that, Mayo can easily be your backup first baseman. He can be your backup third baseman when and if Westberg gets back. So I think at the moment, Mountcastle's looking at a time situation where he's probably not going to get a ton of starts. He's more so a right-handed bat off the bench. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Obviously, if he's healthy, he can be a really good player. We've seen that. We've seen how good he can be at first base. He's has to be an appealing player to teams who are looking for somebody in that mold. So it would not surprise me. But for now, it's just, hey, we have more depth and our bench is really good because we have a guy like Ryan Mountcastle on it. And it's going to be kind of picking your spots and finding opportunities to try to get him in the lineup.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's surprised Mountcastle is somehow still on this roster. But you mentioned the bullpen there and potentially need another high leverage arm, maybe some more depth. There's been some good fun pieces we've seen so far. You mentioned Anthony Nunez and Cameron Foster. I feel like this is kind of where, outside of maybe like the last hitter or so on the roster, I feel like the bullpen has been a big area of focus here and who makes this club. You got some of the younger guys like Nunez and Foster, like I mentioned, who are on the 40-man roster already. You've got some veterans, guys like Yennier Cano. A lot of positive talk from Albie about Cano, and he's been proving it on the mound so far in spring. He does have a minor league option, a little bit of flexibility there. Grant Wolfram pitching well, like you mentioned, also has options. A lot of these guys have options, but then you've also got a lot of guys who, your Dietrich Enns, even your Albert Suarez, who don't have options. How do you see the rest of these bullpen spots outside of the locks? How do you see the rest of this potentially playing out? Do you see the veterans pending health and things continue to go how they're going in spring so far? Do you see the veterans like Suarez and others who don't have options getting first run and they just kind of stash this big bullpen group in Norfolk to start the year and bring them up as needed? Or do you think there could be potentially a surprise or two up the Orioles sleeve when it comes to rounding out the bullpen?
Yeah, I could honestly see it going either way, but I kind of lean on the side of maybe less surprise. I think, the four locks, obviously, we've got Helsley, Kittredge, Aiken, and Tyler Wells. So Tyler Wells is going to be on the team, but he's also not getting stretched out. He's only pitching in one inning spurts right now. So even though they haven't come right out and said it, he is a reliever at this point. He's not getting built up, and you're not going to not carry him with the team. So you have those four. Cano and Enns were guys who I thought were near locks, and I think now Cano is a lock just because of how good he looks. I think it makes sense to carry him. You're going to need another lefty. Dietrich Enns doesn't have options, even though he had that one tough spring outing. It's also a spring outing. He's working on stuff. Can't read too much into the numbers. I still think he's on this team. So then it only leaves two spots, and I think maybe the less exciting in terms of prospect young arm option is Rico Garcia and Grant Wolfram for those two spots. So I think it'd be something like that to round out the bullpen. I think Wolfram right now is pitching his way onto the team just because of how good he's looked. Albie has said multiple times, like watching the left-handed batters hit against him, it's just an uncomfortable at bat, is the way he puts it, just with how good his stuff has looked. And I think it's valuable to have a lefty like that in the pen because Keegan Aiken's probably not the high leverage guy. Your bullpen's better if he's not the high leverage guy. Dietrich Enns is more of a bulk guy, multi-inning guy. So you bring him in early in the game. I think Wolfram has that potential to be the high leverage lefty. Maybe they still go out and get a high leverage lefty at some point if it doesn't work out. I think a big question about this bullpen is there's a lot of question marks in it. and you don't know. I mean, this bullpen could be really good if everybody pitches to their ceiling and everybody reaches their potential. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably not going to happen, just the way it is. Um, but like you said, with the depth with the other guys in here, you can option guys like Nunez and Foster and let them kind of continue their development in AAA. The stuff is obviously there. Maybe a little more time down there gets them more ready to contribute to the big league level. Because while the stuff's there, they just maybe don't have as much experience. So it would not surprise me if those last two bullpen spots go to guys like Garcia, Wolfram, guys who we saw in the bullpen in 2025, who had that big league experience. Guys like that who maybe they trust more so right out of the gate, while they kind of let some of these younger guys develop. But there always could be a surprise, or they could make a late move. I always think of the Danny Coulomb acquisition on the last day of spring training. As guys don't make their rosters of other teams, Elias is always out there trying to, figure out ways to pick up a piece here or there, added the bullpen late. So it would not surprise me if there are surprises, whether that's in the form of a guy who isn't on the projected roster somehow sliding in, or if it's them making a move, an acquisition to bring somebody in last minute.
That had to be fun when you had your storylines all spring and then last second, tear him up. We got Danny Coulomb. And hey, Danny Coulomb's still available right now. He's still a free agent. So maybe he comes back. All right. So the next question we got is who gets that last bench spot? Do we think it's a Luis Vasquez who had some time last year, can obviously play some pretty solid defense on the infield, or is it a Jeremiah Jackson who really flashed with the bat last year, came out of nowhere, doesn't have as much of a defensive position? How do you see that final bench spot going?
Yeah, I thought it was Jeremiah Jackson's job kind of to lose coming into spring training, or once the injuries happened, and it kind of made it clear that there was that last bench spot available, just because of what he did last year, especially in that August when he came up and had so much offensive success. But as I've kind of watched spring training games and drills and, thought more about the composition of the roster, I almost feel like it would make more sense to have Luis Vasquez on the roster just because he can play anywhere in the infield. And he might be the best defensive infielder in camp or in this organization. Like, he's that good with the glove. And if you're going to have Kobe Mayo playing at third base as your starter, it's incredibly valuable to have Vasquez to come in off the bench and be a defensive replacement. I could see it going either way. I think both those guys, there are cases to be made. I will say Vasquez, I think he can be better with the bat than he showed last year, because last year it was not great. It was pretty clear it was not great. He put in a lot of work in the offseason, fine-tuned some hitting mechanics, hit really well in the Puerto Rican Winter League, actually led that league in home runs. And one of the hitting coaches down there was Brady North, the new Orioles assistant hitting coach. So there's already kind of a relationship there. They've been working at it together even before they reported to camp. So I think there's a little bit more to unlock there. He's never going to be a great offensive player, but I think he can be better than what it was last year. Good enough that, hey, if this guy can hit a little bit and provide that kind of defense, that might be more valuable to you than a Jeremiah Jackson who hit well in a short spurt, but also we don't know how it's going to translate over to a longer period, and really has just struggled with the glove. I don't know where you feel comfortable playing him. Right field probably is the most comfortable, but there's also not going to be time in right field because there's too many other guys. So if you're playing Jeremiah Jackson in the field, it's going to be second base probably some days, and it's just not as good as Luis Vasquez at second base. Still, just it's a guy who needs more defensive reps, I think, and there's nothing wrong with optioning the AAA and saying, hey, you're going to play second base every day, play a little with third base, get better with the glove, and then hit your way back up here. So I think off the bat, it would make more sense to keep Vasquez, but also know that Jeremiah Jackson will probably contribute at some time this year, especially if he goes down to AAA and kind of picks up where he left off with the bat last year and kind of hits his way back up to the majors.
Last couple questions here, fun ones. What do you do in your downtime while you're down in spring training? Are you like Jim Palmer, catching up on the latest season of Love Is Blind? How are you spending your off days?
Yeah, not a lot of TV. I went to the beach yesterday, which was nice. Always try to get to the beach as much as possible while down here. It's tough. A lot of good restaurants. I like going out to eat for dinner after games or after long days. It's easier in that first period of camp before games start because it's just the workouts and afternoon clubhouse earlier in the afternoon, so we get done pretty quickly there. So there's a lot bigger of a window. Once these games start, especially with the travel, driving really far, like didn't get back till late from Fort Myers. I think that was yesterday. So less free time then, but mostly just beach and relaxing. Honestly, these days can get long, and it's always weird because during the season I don't have to get up this early, and then for 6 weeks of spring training, it's like I'm getting up the earliest I have since I was like in high school, probably. Like it's just like I'm not used to the early alarms. So most of the time, by the time I'm done work, it's just I just want to take it easy and relax, honestly.
I was gonna say, are you at the point already where it's like it's still spring training, still young and fresh and fun? You had a Monday off day, a little bit of a unique game today, so maybe like you're feeling a little bit better, or are you like, nah, can we pack this up and get up to Baltimore tomorrow? I'm ready to be out.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of days ago I was starting to maybe hit a little bit of a wall, but the off day did come at a good time, and um, the second off day will also come at a good time. I'm always ready for the season to start. Spring training games are fun, and it's fun to come down here and watch guys throw their first bullpen sessions, watch them throw their first live BPs. I was excited for Shane Boz's debut, so I wanted to see Bassett pitching a game for the first time. But now that we kind of checked all those boxes, it's like, all right, maybe let's like speed up this last couple weeks and let's just get up north, especially as it kind of becomes more clear who's going to make the team.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Hey, we still have Zach Eflin to make his debut coming up, but yeah, we pretty much we're getting to that point. But last question for me is look, we have a very familiar group of beat reporters and guys like Andy Koska, the Banner, Matt Wyrick and JCM of the Sun. How do you guys all get along? Is it like seeing your buddies again when you get down to spring, or is it like, oh, you competition? I don't know. What's it like between you guys?
No, we all get along well. It's great. It's always exciting to see that. Like, we spend so much time together during the season that I feel like by the end of the season, we're all kind of ready. Like, all right, let's all take a break from each other a little bit, just because we are like around each other so much. But it's always fun to get back together, being at spring training. I will say that the first night of spring training, I went out with Andy and Matt and beat them in darts. So I had bragging rights a little bit. But we went out again a couple nights ago, and Andy actually smoked me and Matt. So right now, Andy's kind of the reigning darts champion, but don't let that get to his head too much. But yeah, it's always good to see those guys. We have a great beat. It's not like, we're competitive. It's weird because we're all employed by different people, and we are competitors in a sense, like you said. But like, it's not fully that way. Like, we're also friends. It's fun, and it's always a good time hanging out after road games. And once work's over, we're able to, turn work off and just hang out and have a good time.
Does seem like a good group, and I'm glad it's been some, not as much turnover lately as it had been in the past.
Well, when we have Andy on in a few weeks, I'll be sure to ask him how the darts games are going, see who's ahead by then. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. Before you wrap up, can you let our listeners know where to find your work and what you have coming up over the next few weeks here in spring training as we gear up for the regular season?
Yeah, my work's all on Orioles.com, and as you mentioned before, I have an email newsletter that goes out twice a week you can sign up for. I actually have a story I'm working on right now, probably for later this week, a bigger story on Anthony Nunez. I kind of dove deeper into his background, and I just think he has such an interesting story. So I have something coming up on that I'm pretty excited about. I think it's a guy who deserves a bigger story right now, just because this is a guy who's going to break onto the scene for the first time, it feels like. So I have something coming on that, and then just the day-to-day coverage, like you said, Eflin's first Grapefruit League start coming up. I'll be there for that, and looking forward to wrapping up these last 3 weeks of spring training and getting up to Baltimore soon.
And we look forward to reading more of your coverage. Thank you so much, Jake.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That does it for this episode of Orioles on the Verge. We will be back later this week as Bob, Nick, and I break down the best of the rest, the players who just missed our top 50 prospects list. In the meantime, you can check out our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to patreon.com and sign up to become a member today at the $3, $5, or $10 levels. We're going to have bonus weekly coverage throughout the regular season. You'll also get monthly updates to our top 50, access to our patron exclusive channels in our Discord community, and a whole lot more, so be sure to check that out over at patreon.com. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens and Zach Spedden, you've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.
Awesome. Good stuff, Jake. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Thank
the rest
you.
of spring.
You too. Bye.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the best of the rest. Those are the players that just narrowly missed our top 50, which was released last week. And we're going to get into all of that on tonight's episode, which is brought to you by IQ Bar, our exclusive snack, hydration, and coffee sponsor. IQ Protein Bars, IQ Mix Hydration Mixes, and IQ Joe Mushroom Coffees are the delicious, low-sugar, brain and body fuel you need to win your day. The Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all IQ Bar products in flavors. You get 9 IQ Bars, 8 IQ Mix Sticks, and 4 IQ Joe Sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified and entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. Also, all IQ Bar products are packed with clean, delicious ingredients to keep you physically and mentally fit, like magnesium, lion's mane, and more. I've been trying out some of the IQ bars. I'm personally a fan of the peanut butter chip flavor, but there's a lot of great flavors out there. And if you want to try them out, right now is the time to do so, because right now IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text MLB to 64,000. Text MLB to 64,000. That's MLB to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. And if you're watching us here on YouTube, you can get that info in the lower third graphic. Now, I want to bring up something here, which Nick pointed out on our X a few days ago. We just had our 6th anniversary. It's hard to believe it has flown by the years we've been doing this show. So before we get into this episode, any reflections do you guys have?
Nick, you're muted, so I guess I'll give my reflections. It's been a wild ride. Obviously, like Nick said on Twitter, I still refuse to call it X. We have our first show. We're excited. Boom, COVID hits. Minor league season canceled. Baseball has the 60-game schedule. You couldn't have started off in a, at least on paper, in a worse way. But we made it work. And look, it's because of the audience, because of the viewers, the listeners, the patrons that we're still able to do this and continue to improve and expand. And couldn't be more grateful. Hopefully we go for at least 6 more years, because I could do this the rest of my life personally.
Yeah, 6 years. I now learned how to unmute myself. I was saying I forgot. I scheduled that tweet back in like January, I think, when I was thinking about it. I'm like, I don't want to forget this year, so I scheduled that way in advance, and then I was like, oh, when it popped up. But yeah, it's pretty wild, especially like the 3 of us didn't know each other, and it was pretty much just I feel like a couple of days of texting back and forth, and then it was like, let's do a podcast episode, and here's our top 30 prospect list. And yeah, like you said, to have no minor league season, but I felt like that allowed us to get our reps in, build the core audience, a lot of whom have been with us for these 6 years from the very beginning, which is pretty awesome to see, and the growth has been unbelievable, to be honest. So yeah, through all the good, the bad, it never fails when, to get messages from like players or like coaches reaching out, or like people, even listeners of the show, that reach out and be like, man, the amount of information I listened 3 times this week. Like legitimately, it's like, that's awesome that people are actually listening to what we have to say. I'm just a dude with a microphone who watches. If my wife knew how much Orioles minor league baseball I've watched over the last 6 years, she'd have me committed, to be honest. So I try to hide that from her. But yeah, it's pretty unbelievable that here we are, 2026, still going.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been awkward. It could have been like we get in the same room in a lot of uncomfortable silence, but it just worked. It was like it was meant to be, and here we are, 6 years later, still making the same mistakes every now and then with the mutings or the, technical difficulties whenever we have a guest on behind the scenes. But yeah, we're still doing it, and yeah, just couldn't be more grateful to be able to.
Couldn't agree more. And we've got a big year here. We've got a live show coming up at the end of March with Connor Newcomb at Second Spot Brewing, which I'll give more details about before we wrap up. And we're also going to have our 500th episode at some point during this season. And now that we'll be back to 2 episodes a week starting this week, we'll get there a lot faster. And we're back to 2 episodes this week, joined by Jake Rill earlier this week of MLB.com. He gave us a lot of good insights. But now we're going to shift our focus back to prospects and back to our top 50 list, which was unveiled last week. As is the case every year, there are a handful of players that get votes from 3 of us on our individual lists, but don't make the overall top 50. In a lot of cases, it's just that player was not ranked high enough on the other lists to make it. I think we've only ever had one occasion where a player was maybe 49th or 50th on all of our lists and got booted out because of the point system. But for the most part, these are guys that made 1 or 2 lists, but just ultimately didn't make the cut. It's 7 players total. It was 8 at the beginning, but after Wellington Arcina was traded to the Diamondbacks as part of the Blaze Alexander deal, Lisandro Sanchez jumped onto our top 50, which means now there's 7 players who didn't wind up in the final list that got individual votes from us. And I'm going to start with the guy that might qualify as the most notable, and that's Griff O'Farrell. He was the 32nd overall pick in the 2024 draft and was ranked as our 14th prospect going into the 2025 season. We know how things played out from there. A really bad first half of the plate at Aberdeen, but then he got going about mid-July. On-base streak that stretched into August, wound up earning a promotion to Chesapeake where he put up decent numbers over a 10-game sample size. Still, the final batting line of 228, 322, 304 with a 92 WRC plus over the course of a full season was not quite the performance we were looking for from O'Farrell. In the end, O'Farrell was named on Bob and Nick's list. 47th on Bob's and 48th on Nick's. However, he fell off of my top 50, which is probably what kept him off the overall list. And Bob, I'll start with you here. It was kind of a roller coaster with O'Farrell last year because he was so bad for the better part of 3.5 months that it was very easy to write him off. And then we started to see some signs of life at the plate later in the year. So how do you assess him right now?
It is tough. There's no doubt about it, and it's interesting because he was ranked number 14 a year ago on our list, preseason 2025, and just completely fell off. I don't know. It's like I was never a big fan of the draft pick from the beginning. I feel like I was the lowest person on it, and I'm not saying that to take a victory lap or anything. It's just that even when he was like more highly regarded coming into last season, to me it was almost like a low ceiling, high floor type of player. And I still look at him that way, especially once he started to get back to his old approach of just not trying to lift the ball, pull the ball. He's just going to make his contact and take his singles and play his really solid defense. And it was actually after I got a good in-person look at him when I was the guest commentator at the Ironbirds, rest in peace, last year. And I really saw how good his defense was. I think he played second base that game, actually. It was either shortstop or second base, but he made some really good plays. He's got a high baseball IQ, I would say, IQ bar even. And yeah, I think getting him out of Aberdeen, I think it's going to help, at least mentally, for a lot of these guys. And maybe he's one of them. Starting Double-A Chesapeake, and if he gets off to a good start, I think he can still be that same high floor, low ceiling type of guy where a year or two from now, he might be in competition for that last bench role like we talked about with Jake Rill, with some of these guys like Luis Vasquez and Jeremiah Jackson earlier this week. But yeah, I had him 47th. I think Nick had him 48th. And he probably just missed your list, I'm assuming, Zach. But yeah, I think he could easily get back on this list somewhere. I don't think he's ever going to get back up to a 14th overall on our list, even if he goes crazy. But I'm not like, it's not a Vance Honeycutt situation for me, which to me, I was just like, I'm done until he can show me. And now he's hit 3 for 3 with 3 home runs this spring training. Am I back on? We'll have to see what happens in the actual regular season, the daily grind. But Griff O'Farrell, it was never this huge, like, oh my God, I'm done with him. It was just like, okay, he's going to need to hit at least a little bit.
Yeah, I kept him on the back end because at that point, I don't know. It's always the battle for me. Like, do you go the super high ceiling, complete wild card, or do you go with the higher floor pick? I think that's something that I feel like I talk about every year. It's something that I battle with, but I kept O'Farrell on there because of the floor. Right? He does have strong defense. Is he a strong shortstop? Probably not. He's probably second baseman, but he did swipe 44 bases as well last year, which is a positive. Again, he's not fast. Like nothing he does is like outstanding. Like there's no elite tool, but we've talked about that IQ a lot. He knows how to steal a base. He's not the fastest guy, but as far as like if you could separate just pure speed grade from a base running grade, he's very, very good base running grade. He was 44 for 52 in stolen base attempts last year, and he did a lot of that at UVA when he was there as well. It's just, there's also the swing and strike rate was like sub 6%. I mean, it's one of the lowest swing and strike rates, at least in the Orioles organization. I don't know what it was comparatively speaking, like across the board, but among Orioles prospects, it's like EBJ and Griff O'Farrell are two of the best in terms of making contact on balls in the strike zone. For me, it's just two things that really stick out. It's one, the John Mioli's note in his top 10 update or whatever his Baseball America list, the sub 20% hard hit rate last year. Like that's brutal. And for someone like Enrique Bradfield Jr., if that's what he's at, he's got the speed and defense to make up for that. Griff O'Farrell does not. So yeah, I don't know. He's probably going to start back in AA. I'm assuming since he reached there at the end of last season. And, if he runs into some early home runs, it might get some people thinking, "All right, Griff O'Farrell, here we go." But like he did that at UVA as well. It's like once he stopped facing, I don't know, North Jacksonville, Florida Tech School of the Mines in February and March, schools like that, the power just was non-existent at UVA. And I think that's what we've seen in the pros. It's going to be very minimal impact on the baseball. And when John comes on the show, and you talk about why put him on the back of your top 10, because last year I think he was number 10 on John's top 10 list at Baseball America. But I think we've talked about him multiple times with John, and even when he like kind of shrugs at high floor guy, I think that speaks volumes to me. Like someone who's talking with scouts and everyone within the organization about these guys and his preparation, I think a lot of that matches kind of my thoughts when knowing from what I know from him and having watched him in college and then seeing what he did last year. It's just like, it's tough for me to see much of like really any ceiling here with O'Farrell, but I kept him on the back end of my list just because that floor. I do think he can be a guy that sticks around for as long as you keep him in the organization, like quality, depth. And if he is a guy that you need to bring up to the big leagues, he's going to play a solid defense for you. And you hope that he's at least like a pesky at bat and works deep counts and maybe can, plop one over second base or shortstop and get one into the outfield and then use his smarts on the base path. But yeah, we'll see what he does in 2026 if he can impact the ball a little bit more. But I feel like he's not a guy that has a lot of projection left in the frame.
Poor man's Taron Vavra, right-handed, with better defense. Maybe I don't know.
That might not be far off. O'Farrell was close to making my list. He was in the mix for those last couple of spots, but where he missed for me, there was first of all, a younger infielder that I wanted to find room for that we're going to talk about in a minute. But when I kept going back through the good parts of O'Farrell's season, I was looking for that one thing that made me think, okay, this was it. And there just wasn't really that, like, one thing that I saw that made me think, okay, there was sustained improvements. It just sort of felt like he's always been a good contact hitter. The hits were falling in. He's always had impeccable strike zone judgment. He's racking up a lot of walks. He did have a 40% line drive rate when he went to Chesapeake. Now, if he can sustain that, that's going to do a lot for him next year. As you guys said, he's not going to hit for a lot of power, but if he can drive the ball a little bit more and at least have more line drive singles or balls that slice the gap. And he uses that really high baseball IQ to know when he can run out an extra base. That's going to do a lot because he is such a high floor guy. And generally speaking, players like him get a long leash in pro ball because they can handle both sides of the second base bag well, and they don't give away at bats. But the bat right now for me just has a lot of question marks in it. And when I look at him, I think, okay, there's a fine line between someone like Blaze Alexander, who's in camp with the Orioles now and is probably going to be on the roster for at least a good portion, if not all of this year, and someone like Mason McCoy, who is a really good upper minor leagues player, a really good guy to have in your organization, but not someone you want on your major league bench for a prolonged period. It's a matter of figuring out where O'Farrell falls on that line that to me is going to determine his career at this point.
Mason McCoy's pretty spot on comp, I feel like. And that's not an insult.
No, he's been hanging around. He's got some major league run with the Padres, and you get shipped off to the Pacific Coast League and you jack 25 home runs and look like a stud out there.
Speaking of the infielder I just mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to go right to him now, and that's Jose Pena, who got votes on Bob's list and my list. Bob had him at 46. I had him at 49th, and I know for myself that what this came down to was that Pena was highly regarded in the 2025 international free agent class, which was a comparatively slow one when you look at it in context of 2026 class, but still a fairly deep one. This was kind of the guy that was seen as the prize of that class, but as some national writers, including Eric Longenhagen and Fangraphs, noted at the time, this was probably going to be a player that required 2 years in the DSL because he was going to be going into pro ball at 16. And his first month was great. He batted 300 in June, but then things really cooled off for him offensively after that. Final line, when you look at it at first glance, isn't great. 240, 356, 341 with a 91 WRC plus. But one thing that jumped out at me is that he didn't turn 17 until the very end of the season, and he had one plate appearance last year against pitchers younger than him. Think about that in the DSL, where pitchers do tend to be a little bit older than hitters, but still, if you're in the DSL all year and you only face one pitcher that's younger than you, that says a lot about your age. So I feel like there's enough skills there for Pena to be the kind of guy that in his second go-around can make a really good impression. Ideally, his season looks something a little bit like Jamel Newell's 2025, where we see the big improvement at the plate. We see the walk numbers spike up. He moves around the infield, looks good there. So hopefully that's what we see from Pena. And I admit that statistically, if you're just going to look at the stat line from last year, Pena doesn't have the strongest case on this list. But I think when you consider the full context, his age, the profile, the fact that there is some optimism for now that he can stick at shortstop or at least play shortstop at the high level, that gives me a little bit of hope.
I was actually very impressed with Pena. Just considering the age thing, again, this is like a high school sophomore or junior aged kid who's going through the grind of a professional season, shortened season, but still a few months of a daily grind out there, and got off to a hot start. Kept going out there. He had a walk rate almost 15%, strikeout rate just over 20%. Say slightly under league average WRC plus. He popped a couple home runs, 11 doubles, stole 14 bases out of 20 attempts. Yeah, like you said, if he can come back, and I do agree that he should repeat the DSL and have a Jamon Noel type of season and show that growth from season to season, then I'm going to be really encouraged. I think you see the potential there. And also, he's another case of why Steven Martinez is just so freaking impressive where he is at his age.
Yeah, I'd pull up my list real quick. And so I did not have Jose Pena. But when I look at the back end of my list, it was, Peyton Eales at 47, Griffo Farrell at 48. So those are two high floor guys. And then I rounded out with Ellis Cuevas and Jamon Newell. And I think that just kind of gets to what I was talking about. Do I go with the higher floor guys? I could have easily left Griffo Farrell off my list and put a Jose Pena on there. And for me, it was just like like you said, he played all year as a 16-year-old. And so I need another year to see. But yeah, like you guys mentioned, the numbers were pretty solid when you consider the age. Even, it's like he's listed at 6'2" with above average tools like across the board. Maybe he can be a plus defender or have plus speed. But what's he going to look like in 2 years? If he's got that 6'2" frame, it's like, then what do the tools look like? So for me, that's why it's kind of like a wait and see approach. Does he develop more power? Do they lean into the speed and make him more of a slasher? Like what kind of player is he? And so like those are just the questions that we don't know yet. But yeah, to hold his own like he did, he was almost a league average bat. Yeah, if you look at the numbers down there in the DSL as a 16-year-old, which is super impressive. For me, I'm going to be paying attention to if he does start back in the DSL. I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's not a oh well, so much for that. It's just a let's wait and see then. You compare year one to year two and see if we see improvements. It's just a longer game there. But if he's in the FCL to start 2026, and the conversation is he going to reach Delmarva by the age of 17? Then the whole conversation around Jose Pena changes, and that's when you see him rise into like a potentially, if he has that type of growth, you're talking about like a fringe top 30 prospect, I feel like, on our list by the end of the year. So yeah, that's first step for me, is seeing where they place him. But either way, the kid he was a literal child last year, so it's just hard to have any like hard takeaways yet.
That is a really great point, because a lot of development around this early young age, so he could take a huge leap that we're not seeing over the offseason. The Orioles would know that, and if they do push him, then that is a great sign. But it doesn't mean it's a bad sign that he repeats DSL either. So
Now, I will promise our listeners it's not a discussion entirely about infielders. We do have some other kinds of players that we're going to get to, but I do want to stick with the infielders here and go to a guy that was on Nick's list, and that's Elvin Garcia. Now, Garcia, a year ago, was our 30th ranked prospect, pre-2025, and that was after a breakout debut season in the DSL. But last year, the numbers really tapered off as he went to the FCL. But as Nick pointed out over at our Substack, he did deal with an injury. It appears to be a hand injury that might have stalled his progress at the plate and explained some of the issues that he had, including a big uptick in strikeouts. So, Nick, this is a player that we've talked about off and on over the last 2 years. As I touched on, he made a really positive first impression in 2024, but then stepped back last year. How do you see him rebounding in this season?
Yeah, I kind of touched on this a little bit on the last week's episode, because talking about growing pains, I still don't know how to listen to questions sometimes. But just kind of repeating what I said then, yeah, it was year one, he was a DSL All-Star, and you had guys like Ben Badler writing about like, oh, Elvin Garcia is probably going to be the best shortstop out of the Dominican Republic the Orioles have ever signed. And yeah, that's a low bar up to this point, but still like super high praise from Garcia. And then you see him ranked fifth on Eric Longenhagen's list. I believe he was fifth last year on his Orioles top prospect list. And you're like, that is a wild ranking. But I think it was because like he's breaking down data on synergy. He's breaking down every single thing that he has access to there. But apparently he also like saw him live on the backfields last year and was like, this dude is bigger, pushing 200 pounds and stronger and hitting tanks, and was throwing out Samuel Basayo in the same sentence as Elvin Garcia, which, that's a lot for a kid his age. But the Orioles also gave him a $500,000 signing bonus in 2024. So I just I didn't know about the hand injury. I just saw like the awful numbers in the DSL last year, or whatever level he was at last year. And it was Mioli who made the note, I think, in his Baseball America chat, because shout out to people who like peppered him with Elvin Garcia questions in that chat. And that's where John noted, yeah, there's a hand injury. So if that really impacted his season and he can be somewhat even at least the type of player that Eric Longenhagen says he saw on the backfields last year, like that could be fun. I'm excited to, because that's just going to add another layer to this organization. If Elvin Garcia and Jose Pena Like if they can take a big step in 2026, I mean, you're adding two more $500,000 to $1 million shortstops that are impressing in the system on top of Wilfred De La Cruz and Jose Luis Acevedo. Hopefully gets off to a hot start, and the ammunition you have of 17, 18-year-old shortstop prospects with high prospect pedigree could be a lot of fun. Looking at, I'm projecting ahead to like the trade deadline. That's where my headline goes. If there was going to be buyers at this point, to have more guys like Elvin Garcia starting to hit again in 2026, you're adding to that war chest there.
No, yeah, it's a great point. I'm still high on Elvin Garcia, and especially because of the injury potentially interrupting basically the entire season for him. The reason he just didn't stick on my list, it's just like the same thing we were already talking about with the Jose Pena type. It's like there's so much unknown still, and since he did have that injury, since he did have a poor season, I'm going to give the shine to Alessandro Sanchez, who put up the numbers and was able to at least, get off to a good start to his career. That's the problem with these international guys like Anderson De Los Santos. He was the third baseman and seemed like he had a higher upside. Now he's a strictly, not strictly first baseman, but mostly first baseman. Still putting up some decent numbers, but it's taken a while to get him here. The upside's not as high, so it kind of falls back down. I'm leaving room in my heart for Elvin Garcia to jump up into that top 30 range all over again. I think I could easily see it happen, especially if he's healthy and Eric Longenhagen, the same leaps that he was making last year. If he can carry that over, then I could see him right back on this list. But for the time being, I left him off.
Yeah, I left him off too, and he was one of those guys that was in the mix for the last couple of spots. I just wanted to see. I think I want to make sure that the injury was the cause of the problems last year, because the jump in the strikeout rate really did concern me. You expect that to go up level to level, but to see it jump as much as it did from the DSL to the FCL was concerning to me. But I agree with everything Nick said. I think that there is a lot of ceiling there, and if he can be healthy this year, we could see more of it. And I want to go to another guy that Nick had on his list that all three of us were pretty high on going into 2025, but then his season, it just felt like never really got underway. He was held back by a hamstring injury, and that's Ellis Cuevas. Hamstring injury kept him out of the first few weeks of the season at Delmarva. He finally gets to Delmarva in May and is essentially a league average bat for a few months before he's promoted to Aberdeen, where he really did struggle down the stretch at the plate. Now, there's a lot of things to like about Cuevas, and we saw some of it last year. He runs very well. He gives you some versatility in the field, and he can occasionally run into one. He's got surprising power for a guy his size, but Nick, as you pointed out on Substack recently, there is a little bit of pressure on Cuevas right now because the versatility is really what can keep him in the lineup most days if he does go to Frederick. I will say that he was close to making my personal list. He fell off of that. He was not on Bob's list either, but Nick, you had him at 49th on your list.
Yeah, just hanging on by a thread because he was my breakout pick for 2025, but then that hamstring injury seemed to really mess with him, and I'm holding out hope another year because he's still 21 years old, so he's still a younger guy. Um, You talk about the power. I think he had the longest home run in the 2024 season, a monster shot. He stole 82 bases over his last 158 games. He's got the speed. It's just the numbers weren't good in Aberdeen when he got promoted, but he still walked at a 13% rate and stole a bunch of bases. So he's positives there. I'm going to assume the injury, just he was never able to get right. And then you factor in playing at Aberdeen. Maybe that compounded everything. So holding out hope for maybe 2025. He can have a little bit of a breakout. But yeah, my big question is he's probably still listed as a shortstop. If you look at a roster or his player page, he's played 0 games at shortstop his entire career. So I don't know why they still have him listed at shortstop, but he is not a shortstop. And he's been playing a lot of first base. I know there was talk, I was told by someone in the organization a couple of years ago that they were going to move him to center field, and they were really excited to see him get some run out there. And I think with the addition of some of the guys that have come in since then, he's kind of been pushed out of that role. So it's been a lot of first base and some corner outfield. And it's just like, that's what scares me. It's like, that's going to put a lot more pressure on the bat if he's a first baseman, like I think he's listed at like 5'10" or 5'11". So maybe he's 6 feet. Maybe. I doubt it. I think 5'11" is very generous listing for Ellis Cuevas. I haven't seen him in person though. But yeah, it's just what scares me is the playing first base for the most part. And he's not going to be a guy who pops 20 plus home runs a year.
Yeah, he's not far off my top 50 list. He's right in that next group of players. And it really was, again, just like a lot of these guys, Thomas Sosa too, just injuries kind of hampered their season. You don't know how much it affected the development, but he's still only 21 years old. And yeah, just first base, corner outfield, it looks like is what his future position is and current position. And yeah, that just is going to put more pressure on the bat. You saw the ISO went down a lot in 2025 compared to 2024. That's going to need to go back up. But if he does, if he can go to Frederick and just go bonkers and hit 15 home runs or something this year, then maybe he could make it right back on my list, because he's only 21 years old. That's the thing with these international guys. You get, they might be Rule 5 eligible a lot faster, but they also get more chances to develop. Michael Hernandez is still in this organization somehow.
Yeah, Cuevas was close to my list too, and he ultimately just fell off of it. And for me, I believe that his best path to the majors is as a super utility player, just with his speed, the power he can give you, and if he's able to sustain the walk rates to some extent, that's going to help. But Nick's absolutely right. If he's going to end up as a corner outfielder, first base type, that is going to put a lot more pressure on the bat. And I'm going to go now to a guy that I had on my list at the final spot at number 50, but he fell off of Bob and Nick's list, and that is right-handed pitcher Tanner Smith, a relief prospect that was acquired from the Padres as part of the Ryan O'Hearn, Ramon Laureano trade. At the deadline, the Padres originally drafted Smith out of Harvard, and full disclosure, Smith walked a lot of batters during his time at Harvard. And we saw that problem carry over into the first half of last season, but then after the trade, granted, I don't know that Smith had the time to make any adjustments after the trade. My guess is that he didn't, but after a cameo at Delmarva, the Orioles promoted him to Aberdeen, where the command was really sharp. 11 strikeouts to no walks over 5 1/3 innings pitched. And then he went out to the Arizona Fall League, and we got a good glimpse of his arsenal there. He has a 95-mile-per-hour sinker, which he can pair with a slider that's a good pitch. Also mixes in a four-seamer, cutter, and curveball. This is a guy that I do believe is a pure relief prospect. I don't think he's going to have the command to be a starter, but with that broad of a pitch mix, that gives him a good base to work from. And the other thing, too, where I want to give him the benefit of the doubt is that where the walks occurred at a high rate last year was in Lake Elsmer, which is part of the notoriously hitter-friendly California League. So I want to see if a full season out of that kind of environment, combined with the improvements that he made towards the end of last year, lead to better command from Smith. Because I really believe that that's going to be the difference between him being a big league reliever and being somebody who tops out in the high minors, because he's 23, probably going to start this year at Double-A. And in a coin toss for me between him and Cameron Foster, the broader pitch mix and the aids is the reason I went with Smith. And I'll admit that this may turn out to be that he regresses with the command and he struggles over the course of this season, but I like the way he ended last year, and I think there's a lot to work with here.
Yeah, Smith is... There are like 5 guys that I really, really wanted to put on my top 50. When I mentioned last week, when we did our full top 50 list, like there are guys outside of the top 50 that we're not even going to talk about tonight. There's one in particular that I highly regret not putting on my top 50. Like that, and it's true, it's real talent. Like real talent that I think if you're following the Orioles minor league system, like these are guys you truly do need to be paying attention to. Smith was one of those guys that I felt like should have been on my top 50 because I'll admit at the time of the trade with San Diego, I didn't think too much of him. Honestly, I saw a 6'6" righty from an Ivy League school. I'm like, all right, Elias is like, hey, throw the Ivy Leaguer into that deal for me. Just looking out for my Ivy League friend there. I don't know if was he Yale? Where did Elias go?
Yeah,
What-
yeah.
All right, I don't know the sports rivalries between Ivy League schools or if that's even a thing among Ivy League schools as far as sports rivalries are concerned, but that was my thought. And then you look at the numbers and like you said, he's 22, 23 years old in low A. It's fine numbers. You take into the fact where he was pitching, okay, but still nothing special. And when he got to high A and you rattled off those numbers, like no walks to 11 strikeouts in just 5 innings, I'm like, okay, this is at least interesting. I'll circle the name. That's someone that when 2026 starts, I'm going to watch. And then when he goes out there in a fall league, and when you're 6'6" with 7 feet of extension, throwing 95, setting 95, and you're getting a, what is it, 73% whiff rate with your slider, like that's all right. You got something there. Like I agree. I don't think maybe if there's a lot of injuries in the minor league injury dump that we're gonna get, hopefully soon we find out this stuff. I'm chomping at the bit at this point to find out who's gonna begin the year hurt or not. But maybe if there's a bunch of injuries, he could be a guy they think about transitioning and stretching out a little bit. But yeah, I don't. No, you're 6'6", you're already 23 years old. Put him in high A for a little bit, maybe even start him in double A bullpen and let that 95, 96 mile an hour sinker ride and see what it can do.
Yeah, I'm very big fan of Tanner Smith following the trade. He's the one that, from the time reading the names, looking into them, to the time, the offseason officially began, his stock rose probably the most for me. I think he's in that next group of like Tyson Neighbors, not as good or as potential closer as Tyson Neighbors, but in that next group of exciting relief prospects that we kind of have with the Micah Ashmans, and he's in that group for me. And yeah, I could easily see him ending this year at AAA Norfolk's bullpen and being a guy that we're excited about coming into 2027.
I'm going to go over to another pitcher now, and this is a guy that Bob and I both had on our list, but that fell off of Nick's, and that's Iber Cartaya. Cartaya was a guy that I know I considered a breakout candidate coming into 2025, and it did not get off to a great start for him, and depending on how you want to look at the final numbers from last season, you could say that he made progress. He was able to get through a full season. He limited batters to an opposing average of 174, struck out 117 batters in 98 innings, but then also walked a lot of guys. And the walks were the biggest concern with Cartaya coming into this year. I believed that a lot of that could be resolved by cleaning up his delivery, and although the delivery did look better to me this year, we were still seeing the command issues. One thing that I realized, though, when I really started to dig into Cartaya in preparation for the list, and the reason that I put him on is this number, which is his walk totals over the course of the season. The first 3 months, in particular, were bad. He had 43 walks between April, May, and June. Finished the year with 65 total. He had a high walk rate at Aberdeen, but that was largely inflated by his final start of the season, where he issued 6 walks and 4 innings pitched. Other than that, there were some small signs that the command was coming along, but I'd also acknowledge here that he was not that deep into my top 50, and there are still some command concerns there. So, Bob, I'm curious to get your thoughts. We were similar rankings on him. I had him 46. You had him at 50th.
Yeah, I'm still intrigued, and it was such a weird year because he got off to such a terrible start, especially on the command control front, and then he was really dominant for a while, and then kind of faded away. Starting to get like Edgar Portes vibes, which he obviously went through some injury issues and then kind of hit a wall at Double A. We haven't seen him in a while, but I think it's a very, very important year for Cartaya. Maybe he's a guy that could transition to the bullpen and have more success that way, but he's just got to get the command under control, or the control under command. It's a yeah. He's got decent stuff. He's good size, but the potential's there. He's hanging on my list though. He's hanging on by a thread. Maybe if I was rethinking things, I would put Tanner Smith over him and have him creep on this list, but that last, like we said, how deep the system is, I feel like 35 to 75 is like almost interchangeable.
For me, it was just I thought he was a great follow going into last year when he's still striking out like 30% of guys. He slashed the walk rate down to like 10%. He has like ERA of what, like 1 when he got to Delmarva. Even the FIP and XFIP were like 2 something, I think. But he's 6'5", he's lanky, there's lots of moving parts. You mentioned the delivery there, still very raw. But you saw the potential. You can, when you're watching these guys in Delmarva, like we talk about this all the time, how you can tell the guys who are pitching and the guys who are just throwing. And Cartaya felt like was pitching with an attack plan. And I even got some good feedback from one of the DSL pitching coaches that he had worked with years before, and so I was like super intrigued. But now, like, he's 23, the strikeout rate dropped a lot last year, the walk rate spiked back up, and for me, like, yeah, he had some of those outlier outings, but the swinging strike rate also dropped a lot, and opponents only hit 172 against him between low A and high A, but he also was running like a 240 BABIP, so maybe a little bit lucky. I think that the FIP and XFIP were much, much higher this year, so maybe just some signs that scared me off a little bit. But I think he still has 2 years. Like, I know he's Rule 5 eligible, but I don't think that means anything. Like, unless he explodes this year, which I don't see happening, there could be real progression. But like, I'm talking about like he ends the year in AAA type explosion. You can keep him in Frederick to start the year, have him in the year in AA, 0% chance he gets picked in the Rule 5 draft. Protect him in the minor league phase. He gets another shot in 2027. So, I mean, this is a guy he's a young guy, still a little bit raw. So I think if him still having 2 more years, I'm still gonna be paying attention and watching for growth in 2026. It was just, yeah, there were just those 5 or 6 other guys that I really wanted to put on my list that I couldn't. And if I couldn't fit them on, I found it difficult on my personal list to fit Cartago in there, but still watching him.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And we'll go to the last player we're going to highlight. And it's a guy that, to me, is really intriguing, although he did not make my personal top 50. And that's outfielder Cam Lee, a 9th-round pick in the 2025 draft out of Mineral Area College in Park Hills, Missouri. So a JUCO pick here. Lee turned 20 in October. We have not seen him in an official game yet, but some national writers, including Joe Doyle, had positive reports about him coming into the draft last year and felt like the Orioles got a good value getting him in the 9th round. And Bob apparently intrigued enough by Lee to put him at 49th on his list. He was in consideration for me, but he did not make my personal top 50, nor did he make Nick's. So, Bob, I'll let you start off this discussion. What do you like about Cam Lee?
It's a lot of unknown, but I basically like that Joe Doyle loves it. Here's a tweet from last year's draft. The Orioles are absolutely crushing the sub D1 ranks in the class. So many interesting prospects without name recognition. Folks will learn soon, I'm sure. Cam Lee out of Mineral Area College was really buzzy late. He was 19 at the time of the draft out of the junior college or community college, and 5'11", only listed at 165, so you can see the physical projection there. I just think, and another guy that I think could break out, and Jaden Low-Ray was another like unknown guy that seemingly out of high school. I didn't know much about him, but the Orioles have brought him to spring training on road trips like multiple times this spring, which is really interesting considering he never even played professionally yet, and seems really quick to do that unless they're confident in his poise and ability to hang at his young age. So between Cam Lee and Jaden Low-Ray, I think at least one of these guys is going to pop off and be, maybe not breaking a top 100 status a year from now the way that Nate George did, but I think at least one of these guys is going to break out in a similar way.
Yeah, I put those 2 guys in the same group as well, just because of, like you said, all the unknowns. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is a top 30 prospect by the end of the year, to be honest. Like, Low-Ray had good reports coming out of the draft about his hit tool. I think maybe the non-MLB broadcast, what little you could find about Jaden Low-Ray, there were some strong reports about the hit tool. But I think the MLB broadcast, one of the guys, he was one that was like, we got nothing. And they're waiting for a text from a scout buddy. And I guess some scout, I don't know who, texted, I think it was Mayo, and was like, yeah, he should have gone to BYU. Don't like the hit tool, blah, blah, blah. Just trashing him on draft night. It was like a little uncalled for. But He was actually committed to Arizona State first, I learned. I found an interview that he did this morning. He was actually committed to Arizona State first, then ended up committing to BYU before the draft. And he said himself that he knows that he doesn't have like that elite tool, but he's going to find a way to beat you. He just described himself as, the typical I'm just the ultimate dirtbag type player, and also described himself as someone who, if you're playing against him, you're going to hate him. But if I'm on your team, you're going to love me. I'm like, I get that vibe. I like that vibe. I get what he's talking about. So I'm excited to see what he can do on the field. And with Lee, if I had batted ball data on him, that would probably propel him. And it was good. That would probably propel him into my top 50, well into my top 50. Because, yeah, he had 13 home runs, but it's at the JUCO level. So, like, raw home run numbers, like, really can't tell you but so much. But, I mean, he said himself on a podcast this offseason, apparently he had SEC interest before the Orioles drafted him. So if that's true, I mean, there's a lot of intrigue here with both these guys, Lee and Lowry.
Yeah, and just going back to Lowry for a minute, if I let signing bonuses sway my opinion a lot, Lowry probably would have been on my list because the Orioles did go 110,000 over slot in the 5th round to get him away from that commitment to BYU. But with Lee, I agree with Nick. If there was a little bit more about the data, I think that Lee would have been on my top 50. I had him under consideration, but much like with Lowry, who didn't make my personal top 50 and actually didn't make any of our top 50s, it's kind of a wait and see thing.
Exactly.
And before we go, and Nick, I wanted to go back to you for a minute. You said that there was someone you really wanted to include that you kind of regret not including. Who was that?
Yeah, I just saw Bob's question too before we hopped on. So this is my answer to the question about who did not make our top 50 that would be on like a midseason list type thing. For me, it's Starlin Mieses, the outfielder. He's 6 months younger than Lysandro Sanchez, who made our top 50. So younger bat. Walk and strikeout numbers. Strikeout rate was what, like 22%? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think he had a walk and strikeout rate around 22%. So a little bit more strikeouts than you want to see, even from a younger guy in the DSL, but good walk rate. 90th percentile EV was 103 miles per hour. That matches Jordan Sanchez and Nate George. And Mieses did it as a 17-year-old. And then I'll bring this quote back up from Baseball America has their hit plus model. According to them, it just says uses in-zone contact, overall contact, chase rate, 90th percentile EV, barrel rate, and xwOBA. Mieses had a 109 hit plus, which ranked 5th best in the minors among all 17-year-old hitters. So I don't know, a guy who hits the ball that hard at the age of 17, and he's younger than probably everyone we've talked about except Jose Pena. I don't know. I'm excited to see what he can do in the FCL this year.
Yeah, I think Mieses is a good pick there. And Bob, since this was your question, do you have a guy in mind?
I was going to say Jaden Lowry, but since I already shouted him out, Kelvin Zapata, I think could be a break. Obviously, Andre Hidalgo is going to get a lot of attention on the international front, but I think Zapata was one of the bigger signings the year before, or I guess it would be January 2025. It seems like the second full year or the second year that these pitchers get a chance to develop in the system, whether it's just a year older or a year with the pitching development. Is that beer bitter, Nick?
I'm pushing through this. I feel miserable.
But yeah, I think Zapata could be. Isn't Zapata? Isn't that Spanish for shoe?
Close. Putting me on the spot. I haven't taken Spanish since college.
I was going to say the nickname could be the shoe. I like it. He's a shoe in for the top 50 in midseason.
Yeah, I think those are both really good choices. Lowry's a guy that jumps out at me as somebody that could be in there. Another one I'll throw out just because I don't know what to make of his second half last year. What if Trey Sprite finds his way back on this list? I mean, this is a guy that we were pretty high on at one point, but then he hit really seemed like a bump in the road as a starter at Bowie that he wasn't going to be able to overcome, but he actually did have a decent second half last year. And I wonder, that's a guy that maybe you turn loose in the bullpen and all of a sudden we're talking about him as a back-end top 50 prospect again. And I could also see Micah Aspen fitting that role. Tall lefty with a good ground ball rate. If he has success at AA and AAA next year, I think he's got to be in the conversation. He was personally in consideration for my top 50. I just didn't have the room for him in the end.
How about Ryan Long transition to bullpen? Another bullpen demon. Data's always been good. Stuff's always been good. If we could, guys like that, if they're going to start, transitioning guys a little bit sooner, maybe that'll help some prospect status for these guys that are just missing.
That's a good point. And with that, that does it for this episode of Orioles on the Verge. We will be back next week. In the meantime, you can check out our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, oriolesontheverge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member today at the $3, $5, or $10 levels and have access to bonus weekly coverage from Bob, Nick, and myself throughout the regular season, as well as monthly updates to our personal top 50s. And before we go, one last plug here. Live show at Checker Spot Brewing scheduled for Sunday, March 29th. Bob and I will be joined by Connor Newcomb of Locked On Orioles for our first ever kind of collaborative live show at Checker Spot. Will take place before that afternoon's game between the Orioles and the Twins. Checker Spot is a short walk from Camden Yards, so if you have tickets that day, come by, see the show ahead of time, then head over to the game. If you don't have tickets to the game, Checker Spot is a great place to hang out and watch it once we wrap up. Good food and drinks there. We'll have more information on our social media channels over the coming weeks, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. There's also information posted in Checker Spot's tap room if you make it over there in the month of March. For Bob Phil and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.